Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Hello, Enterprise fans. I'm your co-host, Abby.
And I'm your co-host, Chris.
And tonight we are discussing Dead Stop, the fourth episode of Season 2 of Enterprise. Dead Stop was written by Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong and directed by Roxanne Dawson.
Yes.
It aired on October 9th, 2002. Before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time, so you have been warned. And now, before we dive in, a summary of the episode. It's time for the Captain's Log. Okay, Chris, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
After accruing significant damage in the Romulan minefield, Enterprise accepts repairs from an unmanned repair station, exacting a cost higher than they could ever imagine.
All right, it's time to deploy our subspace amplifiers and get into this episode. We'll start with a quick chat about the cold open and then head into our pros and decon section. Each of us will share 3 of our favorite parts of the episode, and then if there are things that don't gel with us, we might have a discussion on any decons from this episode. You might hear a dog bark in the discussion if somebody's Porthos Pick is mentioned, but we'll still discuss them all later on in their special section.
Okay, well, let's get into this episode. And as always, we start with a cold open. So, Abby, what are your thoughts?
Well, I really like a cold open, and I like that this one is a real burst of realism. I think it's neat that they're not just dropping the fact that a big chunk of their ship blew up last week. They're dealing with it, and they're dealing with it in a way that they don't have to do a previously on Enterprise recap. They're doing it by Trip and Archer being out there in the shuttle and talking about the damage and talking about the limitations and the timelines and all of that. And I love that we see how much Archer has grown in just one season, because he still has his optimism, but it's tempered a little bit. Like, he states in there, well, we've answered enough distress calls in the last year. Maybe we should send one out. But he tells Hoshi to withhold some details and not be real 100% open. And that is just such a nice little bit of growth that could be so easily missed, but I think is a really important part of Archer having been in space for a year now and having had the adventures that he has. And he's still Archer, but he has changed because of what he's learned.
Yeah, it's a little detail, but it's important. Early in season 1, they're just rolling up to any alien spaceship they see and say, "Hey, we're from Earth. How you doing?" So yeah, that is something that could be missed. I also love the little bit of humor and call back to the paint scratch from Dry Dock. I was getting around to it from Trip. That was a great little line. I mean, you said everything I had written down as well. I love that little pod. I think it was called Orbital 6 in the pilot. I don't know if this is that same pod, but cool little pods. I love the little tiny ships that we have. So yeah, pretty straightforward, simple cold open, but like you said, it does a lot of work for us, catching us up with what happened last episode.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way for them to add a bit of serialization, but not make anybody whose show was preempted by baseball or whatever it might have been to feel like they've missed something that they couldn't catch up on.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Abby, let's hear your first pro.
Okay, so this one was hard for me to narrow down to just 3. So I'm hoping that we have completely different picks and we can talk about a lot of stuff. But one of the first things that jumped out at me about this one was, and I'm jumping a little bit into the episode, once they first get over to the station and they've they've gone through and accepted that they're going to have to pay for some repairs and done all that. And they go into the recreation area and they all go goo goo over the food replicator. And that just
Mm,
makes me smile every single time because it's one of those things that those of us who've been watching Trek for a long time kind of take for granted. Yeah, of course there's a replicator, but to these guys, it's amazing. And to watch like Archer and Trip's faces, and Archer looks under the table to see if there's
yes.
something there, which is so funny. And Trip is just incredulous.
That is my favorite moment when Archer looks under the table, like so amazed,
Yeah,
like you're watching a magician do something. You're like, wait a minute.
exactly. Where's
I
the
love
mirror?
that.
Where's the curtain? Yeah, it's really neat. And I think it's funny too that of course this is they say Trip's defining characteristic, the pan-fried catfish. But of course he asks for that. And the fact that he's so excited and he's like, this is bad. And he's just into it after that. And it didn't just make him catfish. I mean, it made him a catfish dinner. It had cornbread, it had greens, it had all sorts of stuff going on there. So bravo to that for reading his mind because that was a good looking plate of food. But I like the fact that it's Trip this time who's super excited about it. And he's thinking about the science. He's thinking about, dang, I have catfish. This is amazing. And Archer is still like, nah, I'm going to eat what Chef's going to give me. And then I love later on when we come back to this mess hall on the recreation center and they pan
Mm.
past a whole bunch of people and you get to see all the food and everyone listening knows I love some enterprise food, but they pan past and some people have cake and some people have salads and some people have things you can't quite figure out and they're kind of off in the distance. And then we get to Trip and Malcolm. And this is a moment that I just looked at it and went, really? Because they're talking about where's the computer core and they're talking over food. And you can see Malcolm's eating something he really likes. And you can kind of see it's steak and potatoes and some vegetables. And then there's a shot. And Trip holds a pad out and it's over Malcolm's plate. And you can look down on it and you can see that all of the carrots in his vegetable medley, there's cauliflower, there's broccoli, there's all that traditional, 90s, early 2000s vegetable medley, except the carrots are spheres. He has carrot balls. Why? Why? But it's so fun. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, all right, futuristic space station with your carrot balls. And I just think it's so fun to watch them be able to have that because we're so used to seeing people eat different things on other shows because they have a replicator, but this is such a mind broadening thing for them. And even T'Pol is excited when she can order her cold water. So this scene just is really fun for me. And this little thread that continues while they're there at the station is just, it's so Enterprise.
I just love seeing Hoshi and Travis just having a great conversation in the corner there.
Uh huh.
I love that. So yeah, great pick. And the replicator is so much fun. That moment with Archer is great. Although this is when his suspicions really begin because
Yeah.
Paul's like, oh, they obviously scanned our database. He's like, would have been nice to have been asked.
If we had one of these in engineering, we could make all the spare parts we need. I wonder what else is on the menu. One pan-fried catfish. Smells like the real thing.
Well,
Not bad.
I doubt there's a catfish within 130 light years.
Its genome is stored in Enterprise's computer, as is the recipe. The station evidently scanned our database.
It would have been nice to have been asked. I can only imagine what else this thing knows about us.
Captain, you gotta try this.
Thanks, but I'll stick with whatever chef's serving. I'll be on the bridge.
It shows his growth in there too. And carrot balls. So who gets better than that?
Carrot balls for the win.
All right, Chris, let's move on from those. And what is your first pro?
Really, my pick is really kind of similar to yours. It's kind of about how the station works, except for using people's brains.
Yeah.
But I really love how the station reconfigures itself to fit the saucer section in that opening moment. There's that moment of awe that the whole crew has that Star Trek is really good at doing, but it doesn't do it all the time. It can't because like you said about replicators, we get jaded. The characters get jaded, even though we like are interested about spatial phenomena and stuff. We see it often, right? So this was a cool
Hmm.
moment that was something unique, and it just comes together to make a special moment of awe. But I love how the arms interact with the hull and like recycle whole walls and then quickly replicate them and like put them in this
Yeah.
place, and all those kind of things is really cool and well produced and executed on screen. And of course, I have to shout out the exocomp. It's not actually an exocomp, but it's piece of one healing
Yep.
Malcolm's leg, which is an incredible piece of continuity from the last episode. And I love
Yep.
that kind of continuity in Enterprise. So,
Yeah, and what a character moment for him too, because seeing Malcolm in pain, and he would be the one who he's so controlled, but that's the thing that makes him lash out, and Phlox is the person he feels safe enough to lash out to. And I know we've both had knee
oh
surgery.
gosh.
I felt that scene so
Uh-huh.
deeply in my soul.
So many times. Yes. So yeah, that scene, I've seen that many times, but I haven't seen it really since I got this surgery. So that was very real, the way he performed that there.
Absolutely. But jumping back to what you were saying about the station, yeah, the station is neat. And again, I think it falls in a little bit to that early 2000s, everything futuristic is pure and clean and white and looks like a kind of like the old Mac stores or the Apple stores that we used to have then. But it works. And I think the fact that when they go into the station is so bright and pristine and clean
Hmm.
and white, and their darker uniforms
Pop.
contrast with it so much. Yeah, they pop out, and they really show the contrast between the automation and the sentience, I guess. But though we could argue that with the station. So what a cool place to get to work, and what a cool set and a cool scene and a cool concept. I mean, you wonder why nobody left a buoy to warn people that this station might eat one of your people, but cool concept.
Well, people probably never figured it out because
Mm.
there's always a copy probably left behind. We just have a Phlox,
That's true.
who gave everyone an inoculation, which was the thing that gave it away. So yeah, I could conceivably, like, no one has known until us, but it could still be out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, that's all I have to say about it.
There's one of those dangling plot threads we could come back to. Strange New Worlds. Come find that station. It'll be really fun. They do horror well.
And they could fix Chris's future problems.
Yeah.
Get an
Interesting.
exocomp on it.
Interesting. Exactly, with a little beam.
Peanut hamper. All right, so your number two pro. Go for
Well,
it.
my number two pro flows really well from what we were just talking about. And I want to talk a little bit about Dead Travis. And I think I'm going to refer to real Travis and Dead Travis so that we don't confuse the two. I mean, it could be facsimile Travis, copy Travis, but he really is Dead Travis. And that's what I've been
Yeah.
thinking about him as every time I watch this. But, it's what a brilliant idea from this station, or
Mm,
strategy from whoever programmed the station. And wow, that they can make a facsimile that good of however many species they've encountered.
yeah.
But what really got me about this was, and I feel bad for Anthony Montgomery, who laid there dead for a long chunk of this episode, but everyone around him did such phenomenal acting and reaction
Mm,
to dead Travis that it was really beautiful. And for a character that we as the audience always say he's so underutilized, we don't know enough about him, we don't, you don't end up caring that much because you don't know and you don't feel, well, our crew sure does.
yeah.
Even by this point at the very beginning of season 2, I mean, Hoshi has to see him even in the middle of Flox's autopsy. Flox makes a personal comment about how he's way too young to be on this slab during his autopsy.
Yeah.
And I love this short little scene where Archer is trying to talk to the station about what happened with Travis and what's going on. And how he died, and he wants to see footage. You see it from the station's point of view, you see it from Archer's point of view, and he's mad. Archer's a guy who wants to do something when something is
Yes.
wrong. He doesn't do well sitting around. I mean, he's there talking to the station. He unzips his uniform, he unbuttons his undershirt. He's trying really hard not to let this physical need to do something overwhelm him trying to politely get information from the station. You can see him pacing. He's like running his hand over his hair. And then finally he gives up and smashes the monitor, and the station is just like, any damage will be charged to your account. And he's just like, that's it, I'm done.
A member of my crew is dead. We don't know what happened.
Your inquiry was not recognized.
My helmsman was killed in Launch Bay 1. We think it happened while that section was off limits.
All personnel are required to vacate areas that are undergoing reconstruction.
We're aware of that. You must have some kind of record of what happened.
All personnel are required to vacate areas that are undergoing reconstruction.
I need to talk to a person. Someone who can access your database and tell me what happened.
Your inquiry was not recognized.
Who built this station? What species?
Your inquiry was not recognized.
What species?
Any damage to these facilities will be charged to your vessel.
I mean, the reactions there, even the tiny reactions of Trip and T'Pol when they're down and they are all standing around dead Travis, they don't say anything. It's all unspoken. Malcolm, too. There's like a 5 seconds at the very end of that scene after Archer walks away. And it's the three of them just sharing looks and saying so much without saying a word. And that is beautiful.
There's that face acting.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's all for Travis because they care about him.
Yeah, you brought up that Hoshi moment where she comes in during the autopsy, and again, it's a really special scene, and I guess I will just go into my next pro unless you have something more to add.
Nope, go for it.
Because it flows right in. I mean, we're flowing here. John Billingsley sells every line he's given. From the jovial likeness he has with Reed, he's having fun inflicting pain. Right? Not harm, but pain. To the technical, where he's doing the autopsy, he sells it. It's rolling off the tongue as if he's a professional. My wife is a nurse practitioner. She can speak that language and it just comes out, right? It felt natural. I don't understand what
that
she
was
says
a
half
chunk
the time.
too.
Oh my gosh, yeah. But
it was a big chunk.
But it must be like Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
You have to make it make sense to you in your mind. So there's that. And then it gets me to his scene with Hoshi. And the Hoshi Phlox relationship is really warm and special, but also the Hoshi and Travis relationship is as well. And this brings both of those relationships together in a special way. And I love that little story about him being a practical joker, a sentient jello. What a fun little moment. It only makes me regret that we didn't get periodic pranks from Travis throughout the whole series. That would have been incredible going on forward. But I'm glad we have this little moment, and Linda Park really sells the moment as well.
Cellular decay suggests that death occurred at approximately 23:30 hours. Preliminary cause of death, ventricular fibrillation, induced by an isolytic shock. The vascular system appears to have functioned as a conduit. For the discharge, the musculature shows extensive necrosis along the conductive pathway. There are subcutaneous burns over approximately 12% of the body. The right phalanges and metacarpus exhibit signs of multiple thermal fractures. Computer pause. Ensign, this is not an ideal time.
I wanted to say goodbye.
You may find this disturbing.
I've seen a body before, 15 of them on that alien ship.
It's different when it's someone you know personally.
I was hoping it was another one of his practical jokes. Travis called me down to Decon a few weeks ago. He said that he brought some kind of gelatinous life form aboard. He said it might be sentient, and that the captain needed me to figure out how to communicate with it.
I don't recall that.
There was no life form. It was only strawberry gelatin. Told him I was gonna get him back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that scene is gorgeous. And I I always think when Linda Park walks in, she's holding her body in a very noticeably tense way. Like she's got her hand across her
Yes.
belly and she's got one hand like rubbing her shoulder and her neck. And I think to myself, when you see people who know they're about to do something that are very uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable with, and that they don't necessarily want to do, but they have to, that's their body language. Like I see that and I just go, wow, that is incredible acting. And the way her voice breaks in that scene and how gentle Phlox is in response. You're right. Both these relationships are so special. And it's just it's fun to see Hoshi remembering the fun and doing that laugh into a cry. And we've
Mm-hmm.
all been there,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you lose somebody and you're thinking about all these good times and then it slams back and you're like, oh my goodness, they're gone. And it was just such a touching scene. And to see that again, talking about face acting, when
Mm.
Phlox first realizes something might be wrong and be funky about what's going on in front of him, there's just this subtle little change, and you see the reaction in Hoshi too, like that tiny little spark of hope in both of
Mm-hmm.
them. Beautiful, beautiful facial acting.
You just led into my last point in this pro, which is Phlox, he's the hero. I mean, Archer and T'Pol go and get the body back, but he discovers what's really going on. But he does it through tons of exposition. And it never feels like exposition. It feels like it's his character, and he just sells every line so well and makes it so clear and understandable. The visuals help too, but John Billingsley, a treasure in
Yeah.
Star Trek.
Well, and he's got one of those voices that can sound both authoritative and deeply caring at the same time, and that's
Yes.
hard. And that's a doctor voice or a counselor's voice, or there are people who practice to have that where they can do that exposition with expertise, but at the same time make you feel like they care about you and you understanding what they're saying. And that's such a gift of his. And Flock saves the day so often and does
Hmm.
not get the credit. So, yes, I completely gold star that pro. Well, before we leave this scene completely, let me throw in one silly thing that I didn't even realize until like the fourth time I was watching this episode to record this. When I realized that my personal headcanon, the Jello that Travis has waiting in the decon chamber for Hoshi, has googly eyes. Like
Yes.
I just realized in my head it's got googly eyes. So like when you poke it, they google around kind of like a Muppet. And I don't know if that's anyone else's headcanon, but as soon as I realized that's what I was picturing, I was like, oh my God, I'm never gonna watch this again without thinking googly eyes. So I am passing that out to the universe. You're welcome, or I'm sorry, depending on how you feel about
If we ever have a First Flight t-shirt,
that. It's
100%.
strawberry jello with Google eyes.
Uh-huh. But we can have pink jello for pink skin. We can have blue jello with antennas sticking out.
Oh, that would be
We can have
funny.
all different flavors. Yeah.
All right, anyone out there feel like being creative? We got jello plans for you.
Oh my goodness. All right. So what's your pro?
All right, so my last pro for this one is the very end, probably the last, what, 30 seconds of this episode, where you see the
Oh.
station starting to rebuild itself. I love that last little bit. It would have
Mm.
been a good episode if it ended before that and it ended with Travis being okay. And may I mention, this is the second time in 5 episodes that he's ended up on a bed and Archer's had to go, "How are you feeling, Ensign?" And he gets to go, "Much better, sir." I mean, same line, same delivery, everything from 2 days and 2 nights. But thank you, Travis, for being okay. Could have ended there, could have been a beautiful episode. It's a much better episode because of those last 30 seconds where you see they did not successfully blow up that station. It is repairing itself. It is going to get itself up and going. It's ready to take more people's brains. That's so cool. And it's so Enterprise because I've said this over and over again, but Enterprise lives in the gray. I mean, they did what they had to do to get out of there and rescue Travis and be okay. I don't think they were at all unjustified in what they did blowing up the station. But how interesting now that it rebuilding itself, does that mean it's actually alive and sentient? Is it controlled by someone else who's making it rebuild? What's going on? Open door for more exploration, like we said before. And I love the feeling that leaves you with because this
Yeah.
episode is a mood from start to end. It's got that tension, it's got that slight creepiness, that feeling you get when it's something so completely unemotional with that AI kind of feel, and it just heightens that tension and it leaves it on that. And that's just a beautiful note to me.
They needed hologram Janeway to tell them if it seems too good to be true, it is.
Well, and they all kind of knew it, but again, this is the first time that they've been out doing a lot of this and encountering all of this, and so many years to get back to Jupiter Station. That's a lot. So I understand why they did it.
I don't fault them, but Archer, he had the sense that something was
Oh yeah, they
fishy
knew.
here. T'Pol was the one like, no, not everyone, has the same concept of economics, right? They
Yeah,
just want to help people. So interesting that T'Pol wasn't the one sounding the alarm bell because she usually is the one.
exactly. And Trip too. Archer and Trip probably are two most optimistic, open-minded, open-hearted, ready to believe people. Even naive, some call Trip back in the early part of season one. They're the ones that are skeptical now. They have learned some lessons and really taken them to heart. And some of it curiosity and some of it skepticism.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to say, I don't know if he was skeptical. I think he was just, man, I want to see this computer. I think he was just very curious. But interesting. I didn't see him as skeptical.
Well, I think once he started realizing that the computer didn't have enough space, it was either going to be the best technology he'd ever seen
Yeah.
or the weirdest, creepiest bad news he'd seen in a while. So I think either way, he knew he had to take a look and figure out what was going on.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. Should we dive into my last pro?
Yes, let's do that. Let's finish it up on a good high note.
All right. So this story follows a certain template or I guess trope of Star Trek going all the way back, especially to the original series with the classic computer versus the captain, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have that scene, and you've mentioned it already with Archer goes back to the station to argue with B'Elanna, I mean, with the computer. And he's so frustrated and angry. His grief presents as frustration and anger. And he's
Yes.
hitting the computer screen and he's not getting a response. And it's just that classic. It gave me very Kirk vibes. Now he didn't talk the computer into a logic loop and it explodes. You know, but it was reminiscent of touching all the way back to the original series, this conflict between a computer and a passionate human.
Yeah.
That's it. I just like that connection to the original series storytelling kind of trope.
Yeah, it's really fun, and it's fun to feel those TOS vibes in Enterprise. And sometimes I feel like because of when it came in the progression of the series, that it felt like it had to call back to other things. Like we see the Ferengi in there, and
Yeah.
we have all these other pieces from other places when really it should be that TOS feeling. And I like when we have these moments where it really does. And And I agree. This just had the whole vibe and the whole pacing, and that greatness that when TOS focused on the big three, but everybody else had other stuff to do too. And I kind
Mm.
of feel like that's how this one was. And it just felt like a complete story, even with an open end. So I agree with that completely.
Yeah, with a few tweaks, this could be a TOS story. It would be
Hmm.
Chekhov dead, the cloned,
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
all that. I think you could do the whole thing, and have a good Kirk speech to that station. But yeah, that's my pick. That
Absolutely.
just the tie back to the tradition of Star Trek, computer versus captain.
All right. So it's time for us to move on for a little bit to the decons, the part of the episode that just didn't gel with us. So, Chris, let's start with you this time. What are some decons you have for this one?
I have three. And two of them actually, I'll start. One of them I already kind of mentioned. I wish we could have seen more Travis as a practical joker. That's it.
Yeah.
It's we're given this like flavor here that we never got to taste ever again. But I like to know that that's there and that story is touching. All right, my next one is in that scene in the station mess hall between Trip and Malcolm. Trip refers to Malcolm as a tactical officer, but Malcolm is an
Mm,
armory officer,
mm.
which always confused me as a kid when I was watching this. I'm like, what? Who's the tactical? Because in your brain you get all these categories from the Enterprise, and armory officer isn't that, but it is
Yeah.
in Enterprise. So that I don't know if that's interchangeable, but I thought Reed was an armory officer on Enterprise. So that a little decon, no big deal. But
I'd never thought of that, but you're totally right now.
yeah, I never caught that before too until I watched it a few times.
You had one more?
Yes, I have one more, and this one is kind of big. And I kind of brought it up a little bit, but Trip's dangerous curiosity just doesn't gel with me.
Mm.
As a senior officer, I mean, kind of going to Archer's speech later, the atmosphere on this station was 270 degrees below zero prior to them being on board. So at any moment, if the computer feels betrayed or, motion sensors are activated or whatever, it could just revert back to the environmental settings before. Like, I don't know. It just seems so dangerous with so many unknowns about this computer and the station to go snooping around. Um, I just find it hard to believe that he would do that. Tom and Harry, yes, Harry's an
Mm.
ensign. Tom's like a Maquis, loose guy. I could see the lower deckers on the Cerritos do something like this. But I don't know why. It just doesn't work for me that Trip and Reed do that.
See, I feel like when we talked about how Trip has a little bit of that curiosity that's in him, he's either going to find out the thing that's real shady or the thing that blows his mind amazing. And I think I can see where you're coming from. He probably would not have acted on it, and I'm going to do one of those hand wave plots. But I like that it actually does take him some time to convince Malcolm. And he's asking him, where's your sense of adventure? And he's like, lost it in a Romulan
Oh,
minefield. Do
oh,
you
it's a
remember the
great
thing that
line.
went
Yeah.
through my leg? It's a great line, and it's an honest line. And these two have been through some stuff together. I mean, they survived almost dying in a shuttle, just to name one thing. And you can see now that their relationship has come to the point where he can be like, hello, I just got stabbed through by a Romulan mine. And Trip doesn't bat an eye. He's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they keep going. And again, what a nice piece of continuity from before to this episode. And I do like that he has to convince him. But I mean, Malcolm is always excited to get to figure out tactical stuff and blow stuff up. So maybe he was thinking about it that way. I mean, he had a great smile when he blew it up later. So,
Oh yeah.
but
Oh
I can
yeah.
see where you're coming from this for sure.
It just seems so dangerous because the computer could switch things, the atmosphere,
Yeah, it could have gone
in
really
it could be
wrong really
really bad. Yeah.
fast.
Yeah. So that was all. It doesn't ruin the episode for me. I love the moment when they're beamed onto the bridge and to Paul's look. That is really fun.
Yes.
But again, they feel like in that moment, lower deckers. They don't feel
Yeah.
like senior officers, third in command, right? Fourth season Trip, which of course it's years from now, but he is commanding presence.
Yeah.
And this seems silly for him. And I love the Trip character. So this isn't a character assassination, but that was my major decon.
All right. Well, I have a couple too, and again, two of them small and one of them very silly. But one of them, this station has sensors that can identify everything that needs repair on both the ship and the people, like Malcolm's leg, but it doesn't detect that the warp plasma is booby trapped. That seems
Oh no, I
that
never
seems
thought of
silly to me. I
that.
mean, that's one would think that that would be something that as you scan, as you either walk it over, beam it over, whatever, it'd be like, I'm not letting this on, thank you. Or it would somehow make it inactive. It would
Mm.
change the plasma field or whatever it was to make it not be able to react. But that's just me. All right. I also would like to point out that had Enterprise been being produced today, Trip would not have referred back to how long it would take the boys at Jupiter Station to
Ah,
complete the work. He would
yes.
say the engineers, the staff, the
The
people, the
team.
some other thing, the team, exactly. Because that one just stood out at me and went, yep, that was 20 years ago. And so that's kind of a decon, but it shows me that if we were watching Discovery or Lower Decks or any of that, it would be phrased differently. And I appreciate that that shows how far we've come in just 20 years.
But it also has to do with his origin, his accent, the way that phrase comes out of him. Because I don't think Geordi would say something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think the 24th century crews would say something like that. I think it's just because of his southern draw and like that's what feels natural. I'm not defending it. I think it shouldn't have been said, but I don't think the other engineers in that 90s era of Trek would have said something similar. But I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, like I said, just it and really it pointed out to me how far we'd come. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it being there made me think about the growth, with which wasn't the worst thing. Okay, here's the one that threw me out of the episode.
Oh no.
So okay, this is the silly one because both of these things are so tiny and silly, but Malcolm and Trip go to crawl up in the vent to figure out where the computer core is, right?
Yes.
First of all, the vent cover that Trip takes down is the furnace filter that I use in my furnace. It is so obviously this furnace filter, which is very cool looking. And I think that every time I change it, but I'm just like, that's not metal and that's not heavy. That's my furnace filter. It weighs like half an ounce. So that's silly, but I appreciate the practicality and that would be fun, except for the fact that, okay, so this is obviously a hard vent to get up into. Like Malcolm has to push Trip up, he has to pull himself up through this little square. Later on, they have to boost to Paul up, and it takes two hands to pull her up. How the heck does Malcolm get up there? Because, and I can tell that obviously the actor stepped up on a stool. It's a very obvious I stepped up on a stool to come up through this hole in the floor motion. But otherwise, Trip has the strongest arm strength. He reaches
Yeah.
down and just kind of hauls Malcolm up with one arm. And I'm like,
Yes.
no, because no, unless he's a really good jumper and Trip has been doing arm days double, I was like, no, that would have taken a whole lot more straining on both ends. So it is literally the first, 20 seconds of that entire scene. And it is just them literally getting into the vent.
I noticed it
But
too, though. Yes, I
oh,
thought the same thing.
I'm like, wow, that was a strong arm, one lift, but
It's all that engineer work he's doing.
I guess so.
They're not
All
just
that
pressing
dilithium is
buttons.
heavy.
They're doing some hard work down there.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, that's something you all can't unsee, right? When you watch this episode, Trip has just Hulk arms.
Well, Archer's does his squats and Trip obviously is doing his
Uh-huh.
his lifts.
There you go. There you go. We have come to the time where we discuss our favorite parts for the episode, our Porthos pick. If our picks were mentioned already in the discussion, we will expand a bit more here. And if they weren't, then we have a few more great moments to discuss. All right, Abby. So what was your Porthos pick for the episode?
All right. So this one is interesting because I watched this one and I really enjoyed this episode. And I had a lot of things I wanted to highlight. And for a while, it was almost how funny it is when Trip is stalling the station and he's talking about
Mm,
filing a grievance and are the bolts going to flow up, because that's just funny. But I realized what really stands out to me in this episode is all these different duo conversations that are peppered throughout the episode that really give us character moments, relationship insights, and a whole lot of plot in these pairs that we don't always see together. Like we get the Archer and T'Pol chat about his gut feelings in the ready room and all of that. And we see that comfortableness that they have settled into again and the rapport, and that's wonderful. Trip and Malcolm chatting, we've talked about that on the station with the carrot balls. And then we have Hoshi and Phlox that we've talked about. We've got Malcolm and Archer in Travis's room after this. There's all
yeah.
these little bits of duo conversations throughout that are just good. And none of them are super long and none of them are like the point of the episode. But there's so many of them. And coming off of the beginning of this season that had action, and then we had didn't see people for a little bit, and then we had a very Malcolm focused episode. This is an episode that had everybody in it,
Mm.
everybody doing something, even if poor Travis laid there for a whole bunch of it. Um, they were all a part of this episode, and all these little duo conversations really made it feel well paced and like we got a good bite of story and character. So I really enjoyed that in this episode.
Yeah, you're so right, and especially that Reed and Archer scene in Travis's quarters. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a touching scene. Especially was like, oh, I had to reschedule breakfast. No, which
Yeah.
again is connecting back to Minefield, which is great little
Hmm.
connection there. So yeah, great pick, great Porthos pick.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I'll keep saying it again that Enterprise's heart is at a table over food. And here we go, connected right back to this scene with Malcolm and Archer and Travis. All right. I can't wait to hear what's making your dog bark, Chris. What's your Porthos pick?
My dog is barking about the scene between T'Pol and Archer, where T'Pol's, we've talked about how T'Pol and Archer are in sync now. Like they are
Hmm.
a pair. They're the Kirk and Spock. And she knows something's wrong with him. She says, if I may make an observation.
Go ahead.
You seem troubled.
Guess I need to do a better job at repressing my emotions. These repairs are one hell of a bargain at only 200 liters of warp plasma, don't you think?
Not every culture is based on the acquisition of wealth. The station's builders could simply have been interested in helping others.
What happened to them? They could have at least left a message. Thanks for stopping by.
Perhaps they prefer anonymity.
Don't you find that a little suspicious? I know you don't put a lot of faith in your feelings, but I've learned to trust mine. Something doesn't smell right.
And I love this little exchange because we get a peek into just an idea about how not every culture is about acquiring wealth, which the line is directly lifted from First Contact.
Hmm.
The acquisition of wealth, like that rung in my ear. I loved that. The station's builders could simply have been interested in helping others. And in that one line is stories.
Yep.
Tons of stories about what is this station, who built it, what was it intended for, is it still serving that intention, or has it grown into its, there's so much there.
Yeah.
I just love having that backstory in the background for us to create, the audience. And like one of your picks, the station's still there. It's still rebuilding. So
Hmm.
what's it doing now? I love that. But I just love any chance we get a quiet moment between T'Pol and Archer, and they're thinking through something together. So that's my Porthos pick.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it's just interesting because having watched the whole first season so closely and then this season, even to Paul walking in to talk to Archer, the body posture is different.
Yes.
The interaction is different. It's just like all the tension is down a couple notches, and it just feels more natural. It feels more open. And people who watching this for the first time wouldn't really notice that. But for those of us who have been there for this whole growth, you see
Hmm.
that. And it is a really beautiful thing to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. She's not only supporting him as a first officer, but she's counseling him, right? Giving him
Yes.
a space to talk a little bit. So, yeah.
Accessing library computer data.
All right. Here on First Flight, we love trivia and behind the scenes tidbits. So, we pick a few to share about each episode. So, why don't I start tonight?
Can't wait to hear it. I love this part.
Yeah, I just got to talk about the automated repair station's medical regenerator. It was a modified reuse of the exocomp from the Quality of Life
Woohoo!
from TNG and and also Lower Decks, right?
Yeah.
Now, I love that little prop, and it's immediately recognizable just on its side, and that's a great little catch. Another thing that's been reused is the prop in the middle of the diagnostic room on the station is a reuse of the prop of the artificial intelligence in think tank from Voyager. I think it was also from Flesh and Blood and the Voyager conspiracy as well. So a lot of Voyager use out of that one prop, and it's also going into Enterprise.
I love that Trek was green before being green was cool, reusing all those props.
Absolutely. It's a very kind of tradition now, and I love how Lower Decks reuses animated props and repaints them and stuff
Yes.
too, just to carry
Yes.
on with that tradition.
It's a great tradition.
It is, and it's just like how, aliens in Star Trek have something on their forehead. We
Yep.
don't have to do that anymore, but it's tradition, and I kind of like it.
Exactly.
Another piece of trivia is all the alien bodies hidden in the repair station. We have a Klingon, we have
Hmm.
a Vulcan, a Cardassian. This is the only
Yeah.
appearance of a Cardassian in the Enterprise, although they would be later mentioned in Observer Effect by the spoiler. We won't go to that, but yeah, mentioned in an episode. Oh, one of my favorite episodes. Abby, what trivia do you have for me?
All right. Well, talking a little bit more about how this felt like a TOS episode, Travis has a model of a Nomad probe in its initial configuration in his
Oh,
quarters that we saw from TOS in the Changeling. I mean, it's that quick pan in when you're going into Malcolm and Archer being in there talking. Very
nice.
cool. And it just made my little nerd heart go, whoo.
And he
And
would have that, right? As a boomer.
oh, 100%, 100%. That right there is a look into Travis that most people would be like, "Oh, that's nice. He has a little model," and we're all like, "Oh, that's so cool."
Yes.
That's the deep cut for all of us out there who do podcasts on Star Trek. But
Yeah.
the one that people might have heard us kind of reference a little bit before is that Roxanne Dawson, who we know more as B'Elanna Torres from Voyager, not only directed this episode, but she performed the voice as the automated station. And according to the audio commentary by this episode's writers, several actors auditioned for this voice part, but it was Dawson that just read it best. And this was the second time that she voiced a
Yeah.
spacecraft. If you remember, she was the Cardassian computer in Dreadnought, though she did that on purpose that time and made it sound like herself. But I think that that's just so cool. And for people who were scratching their heads going, why does that station sound familiar? Well, now you know, because you were actually talking to B'Elanna.
Well, and credit to Roxanne Dawson for, appearing in the episode voice only, but also you said it many times in this episode, the tension was so
Yeah.
good. And that comes from the director and of course editing. But yeah, she did a fantastic job editing, directing this episode. So props to her.
Yeah, some of the camera shots, I know we had talked about that before, but some of the camera shots, the angles, how it made the station feel spacious or tight, depending. This was really well directed. So I think having come up in Star Trek, it really helps. You know how to think from both sides of the camera. So this was a really well done episode, and Roxanne always gets props from me.
Yeah, it's a classic sci-fi short story, really. It could be taken out of Star Trek and just be a little short story.
All right. Well, it's come to the time for our final thoughts and our grappler ratings. So we're going to wrap up all of our thoughts on this episode and give it a number. So, Chris, on a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers with half grapplers possible, how do you rate Dead Stop?
So I'm struggling with this. I've always regarded this episode as one of my favorites of Enterprise. And I was cool on it this time around every time. And I've been struggling to figure out why. So I think I'm stalling because I'm struggling with my score. I think it's going to be a 7.5 out of 10 for me. It's a good episode. It's entertaining. There's good tension, cool sci-fi concept. But what's it about? You know, in a few episodes so far this season, I've said, oh, this was a good story. This was a good episode until this scene. Then it's a Star Trek episode. And I didn't find, I think I wanted more grappling with the computer, something about ethics, something exploring the artificial life. Is it sentient? Or, you know, it's some kind of added layer that goes a little deeper than this mysterious, creepy station that is really cool looking, a fun little adventure we have with it, awesome visual effects. But where is that intellectual core to it? And if you have found it, I am so happy for you, and I need you to give it to me, because I think I need to watch it some more. Because doing it for the podcast, I was struggling to pick some pros, not because there wasn't a lot of good things, but because I try to look for meatier things for my pros, and there just wasn't a lot of that on it. It was just really a good episode. Like, it was just fun and good episode and interesting and moody. But it lacked some of that depth that I look for in Star Trek.
It's really interesting. And, you know, I was thinking a lot about this one too, because when I think about season 2 episodes that people always are like, well, there aren't good episodes, I almost always recommend this episode to people, because I think it's one
Absolutely
that everybody is like, yeah, that's a really good episode. And it's got a good feel. It's not too unfamiliar, but it's got juiciness. We were talking about, it's got good character moments, the looks, the feel, the tone, all of that. Our whole crew is involved. The mystery element is in there. It has that open ending. Like I said before, it pulls what you need to know from the previous episode in without it feeling clunky or having to do like a recap. And it's got all that, but I think you are right. There isn't that one moment that makes it feel like Star Trek as opposed to just sci-fi. But
that's a good
I like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
yeah, I think this is great sci-fi. I think, but just like you just said, it could be a great standalone sci-fi story. It absolutely 100% could. I mean, and the fact that they mentioned some of the species that were in there, and they did call the Tellarites, but other than that, this could have been anybody.
That's true.
And that's kind of what just makes it feel to me like this was more of a character episode, and this is great. And when I think about how, when we were getting to this point in Enterprise, they were thinking about carrying some of these ideas throughout the season more and having more threads that were connecting. We're leading up to season 3 that becomes a giant story arc. And I think when you think about it, like if this season was a novel, this is kind of the end of the first quarter of the novel ish. And you're getting to know who these people are now, and you're setting things up for the future, and you're getting the tone. And I think that's where this falls for me in the season. Like after season 1, the writers, the creators knew we wanted more about Hoshi, we wanted more about Phlox, we wanted more about Travis, we wanted more episodes with everybody, and this is it. This is serving up little bits and character development for everybody. Did it really move the plot? Was it mind-shatteringly awesome? No. Is it super fun and rewatchable and easy to digest? Absolutely. So this one came out to me as an 8.5 out of 10 grapplers.
And I totally see that. Like I've always, like you said, this is on top 10 lists. It's one of the best episodes of Enterprise. So that's why I'm surprised at my response this time around. But I think you said it right. This is about the characters and the mood of it, rather than anything else. And that's great. That's it's such a well-made episode of Star Trek. So I'll just leave it there.
Well, and you know what? That's one of the things that I'll say as someone who did this for the whole first season with these deep dives. It's one of the things I like best about doing this podcast is going through and rewatching and reassessing old thoughts and feelings about how I feel about episodes and the whys. And the fun part is surprising yourself on what you think about some. So glad you're joining in on that little joy of podcasting.
Yeah, and when we redo this podcast in 10 years, I might give it an 8.5 then. Who knows?
And I might be down to a 6. You never know. Everybody's favorite is somebody else's least favorite.
Oh, you know what, Abby? I think we have a transmission from Columbia.
Captain, I'm detecting a vessel closing on our position.
Columbia to Enterprise.
Greetings, Enterprise fans. This is Melanie transmitting from the NX-02 Columbia with my thoughts on Dead Stop, one of my top 5 episodes of Season 2. How do I love this episode? Let me count the ways. Incredible and seriously legitimate science fiction concept. Check. Awesome production and set design. Love the white walls, the lights pointing which way to go, the main room with the mock-up of the Enterprise and Malcolm's leg. Check. Fantastic direction and performance by Roxanne Dawson. Check. Great story, action, high stakes, and creepy atmospherics and eerie concept? Check. Archer's excellent instincts. Something doesn't smell right. Check. Wonderful acting and heartfelt emotions from the crew when Travis quote-unquote dies. Check. Great tension at the end with them trying to break away from the station and shooting those torpedo shots to break the arm clamping on? Check. I could go on and on. And also on the original DVDs, there's an outtake of them visiting Travis in sickbay at the end of the episode. That is absolutely hilarious. I love that outtake. And lastly, whenever I watch Dead Stop, it always reminds me of the movie Coma from 1978, which is one of my all-time favorite movies from growing up. I actually haven't seen it in many, many decades, and I just rewatched it in honor of this episode. Coma stars a very young Geneviève Bujold and Michael Douglas. And even though Ms. Bujold did not turn out to be the right Catherine Janeway, she's a damn great actress, and I love this movie. There are some similarities to Dead Stop. I won't ruin it for you, but I always think of it. And when seeing this particular scene that I'm thinking about, I wonder, is it an homage to the movie or just a coincidence? I don't know. Overall, I am giving Dead Stop a 9.5 out of 10 grapplers. And oh yes, I have to give a shout out to the comedic moment and the line, "Evening, Sub-Commander." Love that. Until next time, everyone, live long and prosper.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
All right. Well, we want to remind you that we adore getting feedback and thoughts from you, the listeners. We collect them, and starting this season, every few months, we will do a mailbag episode where we share and discuss your insights and ideas. So please drop us a line whenever you have something you'd like to share, and you might be featured on our next mailbag show.
And if you would like to continue the discussion with us, Or, like Chris said, share anything. And we have gotten some really cool feedback on our first episodes this season. So thank you for everyone who's found us.
Yes, thank you.
If you want to reach out now, you can find us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find us on YouTube on the Tricorder Transmissions channel. You can reach me personally at Abby M. Summer. That's SOMMER on Twitter. Chris, what's the best places to find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter as well as at Shelf Nerds, and on YouTube on my channel, Completing the Shelf.
We want to thank you for spending this time with us. It's always fun to discuss and to know that you're listening. We'll be back next time with A Night in Sick Bay, the 5th episode of Season 2. And, as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer and your moment of melody.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.